Brian and I used to be deep into urban exploration, especially after dark, when the world felt quieter and every shadow held a secret. About a half-hour drive from where we lived stood the SL Asylum, an old hospital that had been left to rot for decades. It hadn't been torn down, probably because it was buried so deep in the middle of nowhere that the cost of demolishing it wasn't worth the effort. That Thursday night, we decided to take a Ouija board with us while we explored it. We pulled into the pitch-black parking lot, our headlights slicing through the darkness and landing on the massive, crumbling structure towering over us. Seeing it in the night made us pause, even with all the places we'd explored before. We'd heard rumors that gangs sometimes hid out inside, using the asylum's twisting halls as their shadows, and the thought made the air in the car feel heavier. Surprisingly, there was no sign of any security patrolling the perimeter that night, so getting in turned out to be easier than we expected. We found a shattered window, the jagged edges dulled and weather-worn, evidence that plenty of other urban explorers and local troublemakers had used it as an entrance before us. Brian and I had explored plenty of abandoned places at night, but this place felt different, heavier, like it had soaked up decades of sorrow and madness and was holding it close in the dark. As we made our way to the highest floor, the air grew stale, filled with the scent of mold and damp concrete, and every footstep sent a dull creak echoing through the hollow building. There were holes in the floor so wide you could see the darkness of the levels below, and we weren't confident that the old wood and tile beneath us would hold our weight if we weren't careful. Every step was slow, each creak underfoot reminding us that one wrong move could send us crashing down. We passed doorways that opened into black, yawning rooms, the darkness inside them so thick it felt like it was pressing back against the glow of our flashlights. Every time I shined my light into one of those rooms, a crawling thought would slide down my spine. What if someone or something was standing just inside the darkness, waiting for us to step closer? Eventually, we found a spot we decided was good enough to set up our Ouija board. We even brought candles, determined to go all out for this session, wanting to feel the full weight of the atmosphere around us. The flicker of the candle flames cast long, restless shadows on the crumbling walls, making it feel like the darkness was moving just beyond the light. Brian and I placed our hands on the planchette, the cold plastic feeling almost alive under our fingertips, and we began trying to reach out to whatever spirits might be lurking in the asylum. We weren't the type to joke around with the board, and neither of us was secretly pushing it to mess with the other. We sat there, the silence of the asylum pressing in on us, the only sounds our breathing and the occasional groan of the old building as it settled in the night. But the planchette never moved, not even once. Maybe the planchette never moved because our Ouija session got cut short. We heard a creaking noise coming from one of the dark, open rooms nearby, and it wasn't the kind of sound you could brush off as the building settling. It was steady, consistent, the floorboards whining once every 1 or 2 seconds, like someone was pacing back and forth in the darkness. Brian and I froze, the flickering candlelight making our shadows dance wildly on the walls as we quietly packed up the Ouija board and stuffed it back into our bag. The air around us felt like it tightened, pressing against our skin as if the building itself was holding its breath. Brian leaned in close and whispered, "Go shine your light in there." I shot him a look, my whisper harsh as it scraped out of my throat. "Are you crazy? What if there are gang members in there?" My heart was pounding so hard that I could barely hear my own words. Brian's eyes flicked toward the darkness as he whispered back, "Forget it, I'll do it." I hissed out a shaky, "No!" But he either didn't hear me or decided to ignore me completely. I watched, holding my breath, as he tiptoed over to the doorway. The slow creaking was still going, steady and patient, as if whatever was inside knew we were there and didn't care. His tiptoeing felt pointless since the second he turned on his flashlight, it would announce our presence anyway. But he never even got the chance to switch on his light. Right before he could, a A laugh, a short, sharp, chilling cackle ripped out from inside the room. It was quiet, but somehow it was enough to freeze the blood in my veins. It sounded like the laugh of an older woman, brittle yet laced with something twisted, something deeply wrong. It was a sound that crawled into your ears and settled there, vibrating inside your skull, a sound you just knew you'd never be able to unhear. In that instant, every hair on my body stood up, and a cold wave of pure terror rolled through me. My eyes locked with Brian's, and I saw it, the exact moment fear swallowed him too. "Run!" Brian screamed, his voice cracking, and we both took off, sprinting away from that doorway as if our lives depended on it. The candles were knocked over, the flames snuffed out instantly, leaving the hallway in thick, swallowing darkness. As we tore down the 10 flights of creaking stairs, our footsteps thundering and echoing off the peeling walls. The air smelled of mildew and rust as we pushed ourselves to keep going, our breaths ragged, our legs burning with every step. We didn't stop until we reached the broken window we had climbed in through, scrambling through it with shaking hands and bruised shins, feeling the cold night air hit us like a slap. But we didn't stop running. We kept going, tearing through the overgrown grass and weaving between the dark, skeletal trees that surrounded the property, the silence of the woods swallowing the frantic sound of our footsteps. We didn't stop until we reached my car, slamming the doors shut and locking them as I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped them. The tires kicked up gravel as we sped away from that place, the asylum shrinking into the darkness behind us as we tore down the empty road. The only sound in the car, our heavy breathing and the pounding of our hearts. We swore, right then and there, that we would never go back. And we never have. The thing that stings the most is that we usually recorded our explorations, capturing every creak, every shadow, every whispered laugh we shared. But that night, one of the few nights we didn't bring our cameras, was the night the most disturbing moment of my life happened, and we have nothing to prove it was real, except the fear that still crawls down our spines whenever we think about it. It happened one night, the kind of night when the darkness feels heavier than usual, pressing against the windows of our old farmhouse. My parents and I were sitting in the living room when we started hearing noises coming from outside, faint at first, then sharper as they moved closer. The best way I can describe those sounds is a mix of cracking branches and dull, heavy thuds, like something or someone was creeping around the property, testing the shadows. My dad and I exchanged a look, the kind that says we both knew exactly what this meant. We were sure someone was out there, stealing from our crops, taking what we'd worked so hard to grow. The tension in the air thickened as we stood up, moving toward each other in the dimly lit room, quietly debating what we should do next, while my mom listened from the couch, worry etched into her face. Without another word, my dad turned and rushed to his gun closet, the old hinges creaking as he opened it and grabbed his shotgun. I could see the way his hands tightened around the barrel, the determination in his eyes, the kind of quiet anger that only shows up when someone threatens your home. Together, we stormed out into the cold, crisp night, flipping on all the floodlights mounted around the farmhouse as we stepped off the porch. The yard lit up in harsh, bright pools of light, casting deep, dark shadows between the rows of crops, the beams cutting through the fog that hovered low to the ground. My dad suddenly froze, his eyes locking on something just beyond the first row of stalks. Then he shouted, his voice loud and sharp in the quiet of the night. "Stop!" and took off running toward the fields, boots pounding against the dirt. I didn't hesitate. I followed him, the cold air burning in my lungs as I tried to keep up. That's when I saw it too, legs, thin and quick, darting beneath the crops, disappearing and reappearing as they ran. At least 2 people, maybe more, weaving through the tall stalks, trying to get away. The crops rustled violently as they moved, the sound mixing with the pounding of my footsteps and the harsh gasps of my breath. "Keep up!" my dad shouted over his shoulder, his voice urgent as he pushed deeper into the fields, shotgun held tight against his side, the barrel glinting under the lights as we chased the shadows moving ahead of us. The rows of crops seemed endless, closing in on us as we ran, the darkness just beyond the lights swallowing everything into blackness. The thieves were fast, leading us to the edge of the woods that bordered the property. The trees loomed tall and silent, their bare branches twisting against the dark sky, the wind making them creak softly like whispers in the dark. We crossed the tree line, pushing about 50 feet into the woods, branches snapping under our boots, the ground uneven and littered with leaves that muffled our steps. My lungs felt like they were on fire, each breath jagged and sharp as I tried to keep pace, but the cold air and the run were too much, choking me as I struggled to pull in enough air. Then suddenly my dad stopped. He threw out his arm, blocking me from taking another step, forcing me to halt so abruptly I almost fell forward. I stood there, bent over, clutching my sides, gasping for breath as the cold night air seared my throat, the fog of my breath rising into the darkness. Beside me, my dad stood perfectly still, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead, the barrel of his shotgun steady, the forest around us eerily silent, except for the sound of my ragged breathing and the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. I watched my dad as he stood there, frozen, his eyes scanning the darkness around us while the barrel of his shotgun lowered just slightly. The cold night seemed to grow even quieter, swallowing every sound except for the harsh rasp of my breathing as I struggled to catch it. We stood there in the dark, not moving, not even shifting our weight, for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds, wrapped in a silence that pressed down on us like the air before a storm. I didn't have the energy to ask what he was doing. The words caught in my dry throat as I tried to pull in another breath. Then, slowly, I started to understand. I saw what my dad was looking at. There was someone standing there, about 10 feet away, almost hidden by a thick bush. The darkness covered most of them, but the moonlight filtered down through the branches just enough to catch the edges of their face. Pale and still, floating in the dark like a mask without a body. Then, the brittle snap of a dry October leaf breaking underfoot cut through the silence like a knife. My eyes jerked to the side, and there, just 10 feet away, was another face peeking out from behind a tree, the faint light from the moon glinting off wide, unblinking eyes. As my dad and I stood there, our breathing quieting, we began to realize it wasn't just two people watching us from the dark. We turned our heads slowly, eyes darting from shadow to shadow, and more faces began to emerge from the darkness. One there, another one further back. The longer we stood, the more we saw, half-hidden faces appearing between the trees, behind bushes, peeking around trunks. 7, 8, 9, maybe more. It was impossible to tell exactly how many were there, how many pairs of eyes were locked onto us, silently watching from the darkness, their faces catching just enough of the moonlight to stand out in the shadows like pale ghosts. I felt a cold sweat breaking out along my back, the chill of the air sinking deep into my bones. As my dad slowly turned his head, his eyes meeting mine for a split second, there was something in his look that made my stomach drop, something that told me he was just as scared as I was, though he was trying to hide it. Then he turned his head back, looking at the person standing closest to us, the one with their face barely visible above the bush. The silence was crushing, and the stillness of the figures made it worse, as if they weren't real people at all, but something else, something that shouldn't have been there. What made it even more disturbing was that we could only see their faces, partially illuminated by the cold silver of the moonlight, the rest of their bodies hidden in the blackness of the woods. Just floating faces, watching us from the dark, silent and unmoving. My dad took a slow, careful step backward, the leaves crunching quietly beneath his boot. Then, breaking the heavy silence that had wrapped around us like a suffocating fog, he spoke in a low, firm voice. "We're leaving." We both started backing away, one step at a time, trying not to trip over the uneven ground, our eyes darting from face to face in the darkness. That's when I noticed it. The people were inching closer, their pale faces shifting slowly through the dark as they moved forward in unison, like shadows crawling toward us on the forest floor. My dad lifted the shotgun, waving it around just enough to let them know he was armed, the barrel glinting in the moonlight as it passed over their blank, watching faces. It didn't seem to scare them off, but it kept them from rushing us, and that was enough. As soon as we crossed back over the tree line and our boots hit the open dirt at our property, we turned and ran. We sprinted through the yard, the cold night air slamming into my lungs, the farmhouse lights glowing in the distance like a promise of safety. I had never seen my old man run so fast in my life, his boots pounding the ground, the shotgun clutched tightly in his hands. We reached the porch, and he threw the door open so hard it rattled on its hinges before slamming it shut behind us. He locked it, flipping every latch and bolt, and then turned to the windows, scanning the darkness outside with the shotgun still raised, ready to defend us if any of them dared to follow. I grabbed the phone with trembling hands, my fingers slipping over the buttons as I dialed the sheriff's office, my breath shaking as I explained what happened. Every shadow outside seemed to move while I waited, every creak of the old house making me flinch, expecting to see those pale faces pressing against the glass. It took the cops about 15 minutes to get there, but it felt like an hour, every tick of the clock pounding in my ears as I peeked through the blinds, half expecting to see figures standing at the edge of the yard, watching. When the two officers finally arrived, their cruiser's lights washing the yard in red and blue, I felt a brief rush of relief, but it didn't last. They came in, asked a few questions, jotting down notes on small pads without looking particularly concerned. They didn't even step past the porch to check the woods, didn't call for backup, didn't ask us to show them where it happened. They left within 10 minutes, their cruiser disappearing down the dirt road, leaving us standing in the living room under the yellow light, the silence creeping back into the house as the last echoes of their engine faded. But in the end, it didn't really matter, because nothing happened after that. The night passed slowly, every sound outside pulling my eyes to the window, but the faces didn't return, and by the next day, it was as if it had never happened at all. And that was it. No follow-up, no answers, no explanation for the figures that watched us from the darkness that night. It was over.
A friend and I were on a road trip, making our way from South Carolina up to Jersey, where we planned to meet a bunch of friends for the weekend. We had left late in the day, hoping to avoid the worst of the traffic, letting the hum of the road and the glow of the dashboard lights guide us north through the dark. We were somewhere in Maryland when it hit my friend out of nowhere, and I don't mean he just needed to take a quick piss. He had the runs, bad. The kind that makes your stomach cramp up so hard you start sweating, and he needed a bathroom immediately. We pulled off the highway, rolling into some desolate little town that felt like it had been forgotten, the kind of place that might have been alive once, but had long since been swallowed by silence. The streets were empty, the lights in every store window dark, neon signs flickering weakly in the distance before going black, leaving nothing but shadows.
The further we drove away from the highway, the quieter it got. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring, that makes you feel like something is watching you from the dark. The houses we passed were dark, their windows empty, and the street lights buzzed dimly, barely lighting the cracked asphalt below. Eventually, we found it. A small, run-down Dunkin' Donuts that looked like it had seen better decades. The kind of place you'd only stop at if you had absolutely no other choice.
It was open 24 hours, but it was clearly an outlet attached to a strip of boarded-up stores that curled into a dark corner of the town like a forgotten limb. We had to drive around the strip to reach the parking lot, which was tucked away behind the building, hidden so well it felt like we had driven into another world entirely. There wasn't a single other car there, not even a stray abandoned one, just empty spaces and the glow of a flickering light above the back door. It was so out of the way, so buried behind the strip that you wouldn't find it unless you were looking for it, and even then, you might still miss it.
We both knew it was a sketchy area. You could feel it in the air, the way it pressed against your skin, the way every shadow felt thicker than it should. I begged him, my voice tense, "Just hurry back, okay?" He gave me that grin he always had when he wanted to be annoying, the kind of grin that usually meant he was about to crack a joke, even in situations that didn't need one. "I'll be back in no less than half an hour," he said, drawing out the words, reminding me of how he always found humor in everything. Then with that smirk still on his face, he jogged off around the corner of the building, disappearing into the darkness as the shadows swallowed him up. I sat in the car with the windows rolled up and the doors locked, trying to steady my breathing while the dark, empty parking lot pressed in around me. I was still shaking off a pretty bad bout of motion sickness from the drive, the kind that left a sour taste in your mouth and a dull throb in your head, and I figured it wouldn't hurt to step outside for just a minute to get some fresh air.
I opened the door slowly, the creak sounding too loud in the dead silence of that hidden lot, and stepped out into the cold night air. It felt sharp against my skin, cutting through the stale sickness that clung to me, but it didn't ease the tight knot in my stomach. As I stood there, I found myself scanning every corner of that lot, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow, checking the dark spaces between the dumpsters, the black gaps between the parked cars that weren't there. It took me a while to notice it. Down at the far end of the lot, nearly swallowed by the darkness, someone was standing there. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but the longer I stared, the more I could see the outline of a person, unmoving, facing directly toward me. Even though the darkness hid most of the details, I could feel it. Their eyes locked on the spot where I stood, watching. A cold chill slid down my spine, and I quickly ducked back into the car, shutting the door softly before pressing the lock button until I heard the click. Sitting there, the car suddenly felt smaller, the shadows outside pressing closer against the glass. I guess that was the wrong move, because the moment I locked the doors, the figure at the far end of the lot began to move. Slowly, deliberately, they started walking toward the car, each step echoing in the silent lot, measured and unhurried, but somehow carrying a weight that made it feel menacing. The way they moved, steady and straight, made my pulse pound in my ears, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they had seen the fear in my reaction and decided right then that I was an easy target. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, my thumbs fumbling across the screen as I typed out a quick message to my friend. "Come back, now, someone is out here." I added a quick explanation, telling him how the person was getting closer, step by slow step, and that I needed him back immediately since he had the car keys. After hitting send, I stared at the screen, the glow lighting up my anxious face in the darkness, watching for those 3 dots to pop up, waiting for his reply the way a guy waits for a message back from a crush. Only this time, the stakes were much higher, and every second of silence felt like it was tightening around my chest, making it harder to breathe as the figure outside kept coming closer.
By the time my friend finally answered my text, the person in the lot was getting closer, their slow, steady footsteps closing the distance, each step scraping against the cracked pavement, echoing in the empty dark like a countdown. His message popped up on my screen, Wait, for real? I replied instantly, my thumbs tapping so hard they almost slipped off the glass. Yes! Within 2 seconds, another message appeared. LMAO, all right, be right out. A cold wave of frustration and fear washed over me, tightening around my chest as I fired back, "This is serious, dude." The figure was only a couple 100 feet away now, close enough that I could see the faint outline of their arms, the slight sway of their shoulders as they moved, unhurried, as if they had all the time in the world. My hand hovered over the door handle, my breath coming in short, quick gasps, ready to throw the door open and bolt if they got any closer. I was just about to make a run for it when my friend finally appeared, jogging around the corner of the building, his shoe slapping against the pavement as he came into view. Relief and fear clashed in my chest as he spotted the guy immediately, his eyes widening before he broke into a full sprint. He didn't waste a second. He yanked open the passenger door, hopped inside, and slammed it shut, his breath quick and sharp. I twisted the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life as I threw the car into gear, my foot slamming down on the gas. We peeled out of that hidden lot, the tires skidding against the cracked pavement, the headlights slicing through the darkness as we sped away with only seconds to spare. In the rearview mirror, the figure was swallowed by the darkness, disappearing into the shadows we left behind. We drove a couple of blocks down the road before I finally pulled over, cutting the engine as we both sat there, catching our breath, the silence in the car filled with the sound of our hearts still pounding.
I was still shaking, my body locked in panic mode, every nerve on edge, every shadow on the empty street outside making me flinch. Meanwhile, my friend started to let out short, breathless laughs, shaking his head, finding it funnier and funnier the more he replayed it in his mind. "Dude, you should have seen your face," he said, letting out a laugh that filled the small space of the car. I stared at him for a moment, my breathing still uneven, but eventually, far enough into the ride, the tension began to loosen, and I let out a shaky laugh too. The fear was still there, coiled tight in the pit of my stomach, but it felt lighter now, hidden beneath the laughter. Still, it was scary, and it is scary even now to think about what could have happened if that person had made it to the car. Maybe it would have been nothing. Maybe he just needed to change clothes or ask for a cigarette. Or maybe it could have been something much, much worse.